Welcome to Commander Central, episode 228, and today we'll be taking a look at listener and patron supporter Chris Boettger's Zaxara the Exemplary deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Chris.
Hey Chris, how's it going, man?
Oh, it's going wonderful. No Max today.
I said Zaxara. I think it's Zaxara, I believe. So someone right now is yelling at their radio in their car. It's Zaxara!
I don't know. I would have butchered the name too. I just would have said the Sultai Hydra.
Right, exactly. Usually we have Max here who we can blame on him for getting names wrong, but this one's entirely on me. I did ask Chris how to pronounce his last name, though, to phonetically to make sure I got that one taken care of, so...
Max is going to listen to this. He's going to be like, that's cheating. You're not supposed to ask. You're supposed
right.
to just try to get it right.
You're supposed to just stumble through and hope you get it right. Yeah, exactly. Well, if you out there in Listenerland would like us to do a Decks You Play episode on one of your favorite commanders, you can sign up at patreon.com/CMDRCentral, where you'll find this is just one of the tiers we offer our listeners. But if you want to just reach out and say hi or just view our content online, how would you do that, Chris?
You can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can reach out to us on Twitter at CMDRCentral. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDRCentral. You can find us online at CMDRCentral.com. And you can also find us on YouTube, where we post a lot of our content in general.
Yes, indeed. You can also find us at libsyn/CMDRCentral if you just want to listen to the audio. So let's jump right into this. It's just Chris and I here today. Max is seeing his parole officer, so he's not available to... I shouldn't say that.
That's pretty good.
Someone's going to believe that. So it's just Chris and I will be taking a look at this deck here today, so I think we'll kind of jump right into it. Zaxara is one of the new commanders we got in the commander set this year. It's a Sultai Hydra, and I'll read the commander here before we get into Chris's notes. Zaxara is 4 mana, so colorless and Sultai for a Death Touch 2/3 Nightmare Hydra. Has a tap ability, add 2 mana of any one color to your mana pool, and whenever you cast a spell with X in the mana cost, create a 0/0 green Hydra creature token, then put X +1 counters on it. So when you cast an X spell with X as 7, you make a 0/0 Hydra with 7 counters on it.
Yep.
So Max always sends out a few questions to listeners before we do Decks You Play shows. So let's take a look at the answers that we were given here. First question is, what is your meta like?
The reply we were given was, on a given night at the LGS, they'll have anything from slightly upgraded pre-con decks all the way to a few pieces shy of CEDH. I don't know how you become a few pieces shy of CEDH, but I would love to see one of those decks. You'll see anything from tribal to control style combo decks, even though the combo decks are in the minority. Also got to note that he's usually the one who's primarily running combo decks, so this makes his deck so much easier now too. And then he said most of the control decks are Fairy Curses or the Bant Jeskai mid-range control.
Okay.
We also asked, what's the goal of the deck in general? So we know what we're looking for, where to push our thoughts to. He said, so this deck started out as mono green Gargos Hydras Tribal. I probably butchered that name too, Dana, so it's all good. When he saw the new Hydra, he was like, I need to build this, my mono green Hydras, not that good, let's turn into Sultai. And then he tried to lean a bit into X spells while maintaining the Hydra theme, with a sub-theme of Infect, which is very interesting.
Right. Yeah. So we also ask, what are the weaknesses or areas we should focus on? And he says he's open to any and all suggestions. He's yet to actually put this deck together, so it's still in the brewing stage, which makes it relatively easy to make changes.
Yep.
He has about 90% of the deck list already, mainly needing to pick up just a few of the land cards. And he doesn't know if he tried to split his focus too much, whether it should have gone hard on tribal synergy or gone further into the X spell territory for the commander. He's kind of split 50-50 between those two aspects.
Yep. And we always ask, budget limit, because we don't want to say, well, you should put these ABR duels in here, and how about this reserve list card and all this stuff. And said no real budget limit short of Guile's Cradle style cost, which is ABR stuff and reserve lists. So, and then he said, with all decks that he's built like this, he's open to always buy, sell, trade, and get any of the cards that he does need.
All right. And that makes it relatively easy to come up with suggestions here, too.
Yep.
So let's jump in here and take a look at this deck. We can start with the land base, which is always a really easy place to start. 35 lands. And we've got a Boettger Bog. We have a couple of the Shocklands, Breeding Pool, as well as Overgrown Tomb and Water Grave. Command Tower, obviously. There's a couple of the Ravnica bounce lands like Dimir Aqueduct. There's the check lands like Drowned Catacomb. We have Fable Passage as a fetch. 9 forests for basics. Another bounce land, Golgari Rot Farm. Hinterland Harbor, another check land. 4 basic islands. Karn's Bastion as a utility land. Pain Land and Llanowar Wastes. Lotus Field, which is the hexproof land we got in M20. Enters the battlefield tapped, and when it comes into play, you sacrifice 2 lands, but it taps to make 3 of any color, so it's pretty safe.
Yep.
There's a Nykthos in here, a Rogue's Passage as utility land to make stuff unblockable, another bounce land and Sediment Growth Chamber, 3 swamps, another Pain Land and Underground River, Woodland Cemetery as a check land, and Yavimaya Coast as a pain land. So we're looking at a couple of cycles, all the shocks, all the pains, all the check lands, and utility and a few things to fill out those slots. What do you think of the land base, Chris?
First thing in my notes I put on here is I have a hard and fast rule. In any 3-color deck, I start out with 38 lands. So
Okay.
I would bump this up 3 lands minimum. And the way that I would start this is, since this deck isn't actually put together yet and you haven't played it, I would run 1 of each basic. Just put 1 more of each basic in until you can get the
safe.
feeling. You get the feeling of the deck and where you're actually lacking, like what's missing. The other thing I wanted to discuss is Lotus Field. I think this card is horrible. I absolutely do not like this card in a 3-color deck because it only creates 1 color mana.
Right,
So
yes.
honestly,
Doesn't
I'd
fix.
rather... so instead of Lotus Field, I'd rather play like Opulent Palace or something. They do similar things. They both come into play tapped, but Opulent Palace creates 1 of each color of mana that you're looking for. It's the tri-land out of cons. So, I mean, overall, that would be better than Lotus Field, plus you're not sacking the 2 lands.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm sure that you're going to discuss too, Dana, wouldn't surprise me, is we have always discussed this, and I don't think that the bounce lands are good enough for decks. It's hard for me to play them.
I tend to agree. I do think there's some situations like maybe you're running a bunch of the MDFC cards and you're going to want to play them as lands early. Maybe later on you're going to want to bounce them to your hand.
Yeah.
There is a Bojuka Bug here that you can replay, so there's some utility there. But I feel like you need a reason of some sort to play them other than just having them. And I feel like in this deck, it's not like you're trying to get extra landfall triggers or something for the most part. Myself, I wouldn't run them probably here either. I would just put something else in those slots that doesn't hit your tempo like those do.
Yeah, I mean, you could even just play the temples themselves,
Right.
I mean,
or the filter lands, play the battle bond lands.
Yeah, anything like that.
Yeah. Tends to be where I come down as well. I share your thoughts on Lotus Field. I think Lotus Field is a cool card. I don't think a 3-color deck is a place where you want it necessarily, and you're not doing anything with lands in the graveyard either, so there's no extra value there. I also agree 35 is a little lighter than I would like. I believe that there's a version of this deck that someone could play where if they told me they played 35 lands and it was fine, I would believe them. I think you can get away with that in some situations.
Well, if you're playing a whole bunch of mana doublers or a million artifact, ramp cards or whatever, then I could see you doing it. But
this deck doesn't feel like that version of the deck that can do that, I think. Especially because it's new, I also agree with that statement too. Starting with more lands and then tweak down is way easier than starting with too few and tweaking up.
Yep. I mean, I would, honestly, if it were a new deck and I go to play it, I want to make sure that the deck is playing properly so I get a feel for the deck before I start tweaking. I'd rather show up and be like, oh, I lost, but everything played good, instead of just being like, well, I got no lands and I just can't do anything, so I have no clue if the deck's any good.
Right. And I also tend to agree, when in doubt, add a couple more basics. So yeah, a couple things you could, the basics make sense, although I do think there's things like Exotic Orchard that's probably going to make at least 2 of your colors, if not all 3. Path of Ancestry is going to give you a free scry, and it makes any color that you could use. There's City of Brass and Mana Confluence, which are a little bit more pricey. I think there's a lot of options, though, here, and I would be very tempted to run a lot of those over those bounce lands in Lotus Field for sure.
Yes.
One more I'll comment. I like Karn's Bastion a lot, but I don't know if I like it that much here. It's 4 mana to proliferate, and that's great in a Super Friends deck, I think, or maybe some decks that are using +1 counters in a different way. But I think here, when you're making a big, Hydra with 9 counters on it, I don't know if spending 5 mana to put 1 additional counter on a couple of Hydras is very often going to be worth it.
Not to mention it's colorless, so it could actually hurt you in the long run.
And it's colorless mana as a land, so I think this deck needs a bit of fixing too. I don't love Karn's Bastion here either. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't think it's a bad card, but I also feel like there's other things I think are going to help you more often, like having really, really good mana from running, like you said, even just one of the tri-lands that's going to make every color you need.
Yes.
All right, next up, let's look at the artifacts here that are really, really easy because there's only 5 of them.
There sure is.
Arcane Signet, Loxodon Warhammer as an equipment, Shadow Spear as an equipment, the Great Hinge, and the Ozolith. What do you think of these artifacts, Chris?
I like them. The ones that are kind of iffy for me is like Arcane Signet and Loxodon Warhammer. But I understand them both. Arcane Signet gives you 1 mana of any color because you got that, and it's only 2 mana to cast. And the Warhammer gives you lifelink and trample, and you're going to have big beaters. But I don't know, don't your big beaters usually already have trample on them to begin with? So it's kind of like
a lot of them do.
Yeah, it's kind of up in the air on those. But the lifelink, I think, is huge on Loxodon Warhammer because it could change the tide of the game.
Yeah, that's true.
You're a slower deck per se, but what about you?
Ozolith is busted.
You think?
Great Hinge is great too. I would say Arcane Signet is great of a card as it is. I think this deck is really, really greedy for green mana. There's a lot of things that are triple red, definitely a lot of things that are, triple green, a lot of things that are double green. And I think there's going to be those turns where you really want to cast, a Hydra that costs 3 green, and then also cast a Hydra that costs 2 green, or also cast one of your enchantments that costs 1 or 2 green. And I think you're going to find situations where you have enough mana, but you don't have enough green mana.
Okay. Oh, I know where you're going with this too.
So yeah, I feel like Chromatic Lantern is going to, yes, it costs 1 more than Arcane Signet, but I would guess that at the end of the day, the amount of times you sit there and think, I wish I had a mana rock that only costs 2 and not 3, is going to occur less often than you say, I wish this mana rock perfectly fixed all my lands so they could, if I need to, I can make 9 green mana this turn.
Yes.
So I can cast that Lifeblood Hydra and that Phyrexian Hydra and still have 1 mana left over for a Burgeoning or something. I feel like there's so much green mana that this deck wants that you are going to appreciate having that option.
That is actually a really, really good point. Like, that didn't even cross my mind when I was doing my notes and as soon as you started talking about it, I'm like, oh, yeah, duh.
Yeah, just especially because it's a 3-color deck.
Yes.
And if it was even more balanced, I would say, don't worry about it. But it's just so green heavy that I think you're going to encounter situations where you want that green mana more than you want it to be just a 2-mana rock. So
yeah,
a Warhammer I don't love necessarily, but I agree with you when you say that lifelink, particularly on some big 12/12 Hydra, can buy you a turn. It's like it keeps you alive an extra turn. I still don't know if I would run it, but it's not bad at all.
No, I mean, I don't.
Whereas Shadow Spear is genuinely.
Oh yeah, Shadow Spear is just.
Shadow Spear is great, so that would stay here for sure. And I'll quick do Planeswalkers here too. We'll just mention it because there's only one. There's Nissa who shakes the world here, and she is the 5 mana, 5 loyalty Planeswalker. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green. Her +1 is you put 3 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land you control and untap it. When it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with vigilance and haste until end of turn, it's still a land. And her -8 is you get an emblem with lands you control, gain indestructible, and you can search your library for any number of forest cards, put them onto the battlefield, tapped, then shuffle your library. So there's 9 forests in here basically, or as basics, and there's a few different forests as well when they're dual lands with the forest type. It's a mana doubler, it's got good utility, it's just a good card in general.
It is. I was actually thinking, because the way I did this deck was I stuck to the theme of Hydras, but also did, the X spells to benefit the other thing. And I was thinking of the other Nissa. Nissa, Steward of Elements.
Yep.
The X and green-blue. And just, granted, her abilities don't play into what you're doing, but there is an enchantment in this deck that gives you infinite mana. So if you go infinite mana into her, turn your 12 lands into, 20/20 flyers, you just win the game. And
you make a free Hydra off your commander, possibly an infinite Hydra if you're casting her for infinite. So I actually, as much as I like this Nissa, I think I agree I would run the green-blue one.
Yep. And worst case scenario, you get a scry off of her, by upticking her, which is huge in this deck because, not a whole lot of card draw because you're focusing on other aspects of the game.
I like this one, but I agree. I think I would, if I had to run one Nissa Planeswalker, it would probably be the green-blue one.
Yes.
All right, Chris, why don't we take a look at the instant speed spells here? What do we have?
All right, we have 13 instants. We have Beast Within, Cyclonic Rift, Deadly Rollick, Death Sprout, Harrow, Heroic Intervention, Inspiring Call, Crossing Grip, Naturalize, Nature's Claim, Putrefy, Return of the Wild Speaker, and Tainted Strike. So the first one I want to talk about right now is Deadly Rollick. For those of you that don't remember this card, it says, if you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost, and it's exile target creature. I actually forgot this was a card until I was reading through this deck, and I'm like, oh, hey, that's really good.
I did the same thing. I'm like, Deadly Rollick, what is that? I assumed it was something to do with +1 counters that I just didn't remember. And I'm like, oh yeah, man, that's an instant too. I forgot that. I'm like,
Yup.
and it's an exile, an instant speed exile if you control your commander. That's really, really good.
Yeah,
I agree. I forgot how good that card was.
And honestly, the way that this deck is built, it kind of, you're going to have your commander out, most of the time. It kind of relies on the commander to get extra value. So that's actually a really good card in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
So what are your views on these, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
There's a lot of removal here, and it's all very good for the most part. I like a lot of it. Couple suggestions. I don't like Naturalize for a couple reasons. If you want to run that spell, Return to Nature is literally just a better Naturalize. It's Naturalize, and it has the option to hit a card in a graveyard for this, same exact casting cost. So if you want that effect, Return to Nature is just better in every way. Deglamour and Unravel the Aether aren't strictly better because they do a different thing, but I think more often than not, shuffling a thing in makes it tougher to retrieve than putting it in the graveyard. And they can hit indestructible stuff, and you can use it when somebody vamp tutors or something. You can screw up their tutor, that kind of thing. So I think the utility on a Deglamour or Unravel the Aether is also better than Naturalize.
Yes.
All that said, I would still probably just run Assassin's Trophy in that slot.
Right?
Because it just hits more things. They can hit the creature, it can hit a planeswalker. So I would just replace it. If you wanted a target removal spell there, I would just replace it with Assassin's Trophy myself.
Yeah. I looked at it and I did not like Naturalize, and I'm still not a huge fan of Putrefy anymore.
Sure,
my flop was Putrefy for Assassin's Trophy. I didn't even think about Naturalize for Assassin's Trophy, but...
Yeah, I mean, Putrefy the same thing. Like, if you wanted to keep that Naturalize or make that a Deglamour or something, same thing. I would make Putrefy into Assassin's Trophy as well.
The other one, and I noticed this in your notes because I was scrolling through it here quick, is Harrow.
Yeah.
I don't think this deck is a Harrow deck. I really don't think so.
I would agree as well. For those who don't recall, Harrow's 3 mana. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a land, and you can search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them in the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Harrow's a great card if you're doing landfall stuff, because those landfall decks then tend to also be able to play lands from the graveyard. So, you Harrow to go get 2 lands for 2 landfall triggers, and then you use your Crucible or your Excavator to play the land you just blew up into play as your land for turn anyway.
Yep.
This isn't doing any of those things. Like, for the most part, none of your stuff cares about landfall. You're not playing lands from the graveyard. I feel like if you want a ramp spell, just run a ramp spell here. Just put in a Farseek or something.
Yes. I was also thinking, you could run like a Momentous Fall or what's the other one? Hunter's Insight. Like
just draw a ton.
Yep. I mean, because drawing cards is always worth it, especially in a deck like this.
Yeah.
You may not be able to play them right away, but keeping your hand full is awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And there's things like the Ozolith and a couple of the creatures, too, that will then recycle those counters on the creature you sacrifice. So, yep, those are the main ones I had there among the instants.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, that when I saw the Naturalize, I immediately thought of you, and I'm like, oh, I guarantee he's going to say no to that Naturalize. But honestly, that is like when you first start out building a deck, and you're just quickly throwing it together, you think about, okay, well, I need artifact enchantment. Well, I know immediately Naturalize pops into mind. You're like, okay, this goes here, but this can always be replaced by something better.
Yes. So let's pop over to the enchantments next. There's 8 of those here. We've got Burgeoning, Doubling Season, Elemental Bond, Freed from the Real, which Chris mentioned as one of the things that generate infinite mana here.
Yep.
Greater Good, Kindred Discovery, Simic Ascendancy, and Unbound Flourishing. So a couple of these we'll go into specifics on because they're not that commonly played. Elemental Bond is 3 mana. Whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters battlefield under your control, you draw a card. We have Freed from the Real, which was the infinite mana one. It's a 3 mana enchantment. It's an aura, and you can spend 1 mana to tap an enchanted creature or 1 mana to untap enchanted creature. So this is a relatively simple interaction. You put it on Zaxara. It taps for 2 mana of any one color. You use 1 of those mana on the Freed from the Real to untap your commander. Tap it again. Basically, you can generate 1 at a time, but generate infinite mana with your commander.
Yep.
Greater Good is a sacrifice to draw cards. Unbound Flourishing is basically whenever you cast a permanent spell with a mana cost that contains X, double the value of X. So I mean, it does perfectly what Zaxara wants to do.
Yep.
And Simic Ascendancy is actually a really good card as well that I haven't seen. I don't think I've ever seen anyone actually cast it, or at least not recently. But in a deck where it works, it's amazing. It's colorless, green, and a blue. Put a +1 counter on target creature you control, which you probably aren't going to be doing that much, but it's still fairly useful. But the real beauty of this card is whenever one or more +1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. So yes, you put a counter on it when you use the previous ability, but it's whenever. So like whenever you cast one of these hydras with an X in the cost, or whenever you make a hydra with the Zaxara, you're putting the counters on Simic Ascendancy. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if it has 20 more growth counters on it, you win the game.
Yep.
I mean, this is just really easy to get 20 or more counters on in this deck.
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me if you just put 20 counters on it in one turn and then look at the table and go, can you stop me?
Good luck, everyone. Yeah, super cool card for this deck. Kindred Discovery, same thing. Because it procs off of a creature entering the battlefield, not even being cast, all the tokens you're making off your commander draw you free cards. So I think this is a really good collection of enchantments. Is there anything you would add or change here, Chris?
I really don't think there is anything I could. The only one that's like kind of falls behind the rest of them is Burgeoning. I mean, like all the other ones are really, really good, and then you look at Burgeoning, and you're like, I don't know if that's as good as the other ones, but Burgeoning is a super powerful card too.
It is, right, it is. I think Burgeoning, the only problem with Burgeoning I would say here is this isn't a deck that draws a ton of cards, so I think you'll play your 2 lands out of your hand that you have left over with Burgeoning, and then that's it.
Yep.
You're not going to like Burgeoning is great maybe in an Enchantress deck or something where you have 1 or 2 Enchantresses out, and then you play an enchantment and play an enchantment and play an enchantment and draw like 6 cards, and then you go on the table and play a land and everyone else's turn and it comes back to you, and then you do that all again.
Yes.
Like you can get so far ahead in some decks with Burgeoning. I don't think this is quite that deck, but it's definitely still a good card.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of a card that you could replace this with would be Concordant Crossroads. Both at the 1 mana cost, but Concordant gives you haste. So all your green, you drop a 20/20 Hydra with Trample, and all of a sudden, he has haste, and just come in and smack someone.
Yeah, no, that's not a bad call there. The one I was thinking about, Garruk's Uprising, was an M21. It's the same cost mana-wise as Elemental Bond. When it enters a battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. So unlike Elemental Bond, it just draws you a card when it comes into play if you have a big creature. It also gives all your creatures trample, which this is a thing he's looking for a little bit in this deck.
Yep.
The main downside is whenever a creature with power 4 or greater comes into play, you draw a card versus 3 or greater with Zaxara. So I guess the question winds up being, how often is the creature or the hydras you're making, are they 3 power versus 4 power? And having never played the deck, I don't know, and I don't know if he knows it either, having not played the deck.
Yeah.
That would be something I would say maybe just play it with Elemental Bond, and every time you cast something and draw a card with Elemental Bond, like make a mental note to yourself whether or not it would have also worked with Garruk's Uprising or not. And just after, 3 or 4 games or 3 or 4 times with Elemental Bond out, like kind of do the math and say, would I have been better off having Garruk's Uprising out? If you find out that, 3/4 of the time the creatures are 3 power or something, then you're better off with Elemental Bond. But if you find out that 4 out of the 5 creatures coming into play are 4 or greater, well, then having Trample and getting the extra card when it comes into play are probably better. So
yes.
I think it's tough to tell right now. I can't really get a feel for it, but I think if you play it for a while, you'll kind of get that vibe and know which is better. That's really it for enchantments. I guess there's one more I kind of liked here. I would mention Branching Evolution is 2 and a green for an enchantment. If 1 or more +1 counters will be put onto a creature you control, twice that many are put onto it instead. So, it's not casting that creature, it's just putting on. So any of the creatures you make, even the tokens that you're making with your commander, are going to come in with twice as many counters.
Yes.
So that's one I would probably try to find a slot for too. That would be really good in this deck. Okay, I think we're down to sorceries and creatures. So let's do sorceries here, Chris. What do we have?
All right, we got 17 sorceries. We have Animus Awakening, Exsanguinate, Finale of Revelation, Growth from the Ashes, In Garruk's Wake, Killing Wave, Kindred Dominance, Kadama's Reach, Mass Manipulation, Nature's Lore, Open into Wonder, Overwhelming Stampede, Rampant Growth, Torment of Hailfire, Triumph of the Hordes, Villainous Wealth, and Windfall. And I already know which one you're going to say no to.
That would be Windfall.
Yes. Agreed with you there.
First of all, I will say that there's a lot of X. This is where the X spells are that will really take advantage of Freed from the Real for one, and Zaxara as well. So there's quite a few of them here, along with the creatures. And I think actually I like this. This is what I like to see in decks. I like weird decks like this that then make you run Killing Wave. Killing Wave isn't a particularly good card. It's back from Innistrad, and it's X and black. For each creature its controller sacrifices it unless he or she pays X life. That's not a great card necessarily, but here, when it makes you a free big Hydra, and if you're in the right position where you've set yourself up and I only have one creature in play, but my opponent has 6 creatures in play, so I'm going to set X to 4. I'll lose 4 life, and they have to either lose 16 or 20 or 24 or something, and I'm making a free Hydra off the deal. That's a pretty cool spell here in this one deck.
Yes.
So I like seeing that kind of thing here. Finale Revelation, X blue draw spells get way better here than they would somewhere else. Exsanguinate's always great, but it's even better here.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of the Finale of Revelation, and it's okay at best. I actually would rather play a card like Brain Geyser, or there was another one that came out just recently called Mind Spring, which is identical to Brain Geyser. You don't get the extra oomph to it, but you can target players with it, so you could mill someone else out.
Having the option to use that infinite mana to kill somebody is really nice.
Yes.
Actually, one of the things I had down here for Windfall is Damnable Pact, which is the black one.
Yes.
Draw a card and lose a life. So same thing there. Damnable Pact's a really good spell. Just in general, you can cast it for 4 or 5 and draw a couple cards and lose a little bit of life if you want to. But if you happen to have 14 mana free or something when it's late in the game, you can kill somebody with it because it's targetable. And if you have infinite mana, you can definitely kill somebody with it.
Yep. I like Mass Manipulation in decks, but this deck is very shy on blue mana. So that quad blue pips is going to be really hard. Plus, it's a double X, so you need a lot of mana to pump into it. So that one I just found hard. I honestly would rather play like a Profane Command. Give your guys fear, do something else off of it, something like that, and just go blah with everything.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree. I think Mass Manipulation, the 4 blue is a big problem there, but double X is also not great.
Yes. Another one that I looked at is The Crowd Goes Wild. It is X and a green, and this is actually from Battle Bond. It has Assist, where any player can pay, amount of X, and then also has Support X, where I put a +1/+1 counter on each of X target creatures. Then it says each creature with a +1/+1 counter on it gains trample until end of turn. So you're getting an X spell that adds counters, that then gives all your creatures that have counters trample. So it's pretty much like a overwhelming stampede, except for you get to choose how much you put into it.
Yeah, I really like Open into Wonder here a lot too. That's blue X. X target creatures can't be blocked this turn.
Yep.
And until end of turn, those creatures gain whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Perfect deck for it. You get your Hydras to poke through for damage. It's an X spell, so it makes you a Hydra. Draw some cards off it. It's a super cool card, and this is a perfect place for it.
Agreed. This is definitely one of those decks where you're like, I don't want to go too hard into the X's, but I don't I want to at the same time. And it's actually kind of hard, which I was actually thinking about this going back to artifacts quick. If we're going to go hard into X's, if you decide to, you really need like some boots or some greaves, something to keep your commanders safe.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Because people will definitely be not even your commander, they'll be gunning for that, that 24/24 Hydra swinging in too, rather than get hit with it.
Yep.
So having the option to protect it, or even like an asceticism or something.
Yes, that could work too.
The only other card I don't really like that much here among sorceries is Girl from the Ashes. It's 2 and a green, and it has Kicker 2. So if you don't kick it, search your library for a basic land card to put on the battlefield and shuffle your library. So it's a worse Kadama's Reach / Cultivate at that point. If you kick it, so you spend 5 mana, search your library for 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield and shuffle your library. I would have just run Skyshroud Claim and spend 1 less mana, and you can get the lands untapped on top of it.
Yep. I mean, let's see, we have Kodama's Reach. We don't have the other one in here, so you could just play the other one straight up in replacement. Yeah.
Play Cultivate, play Skyshroud Claim. There's a handful of relatively cheap ramp spells that are just slightly better.
Yep.
And they're not going to win you the game or anything, but it's just going to make life easier. They're like quality of life improvements, I would almost say. It just makes casting the spells and doing your thing easier.
Yes.
So last but not least, Chris, why don't you tell us what we have here for creatures?
So we'll move on to the creatures. Like you said, Dana, we got 20 of them. We got Gargos of Vicious Watcher, Herald of Secret Streams, Hungering Hydra, Hydra Broodmaster, Hydra Krasis, Colonian Hydra, Lifeblood Hydra, Managorger Hydra, Nylea, God of the Hunt, Oracle of Moldiah, Phyrexian Hydra, Primordial Hydra, Protean Hydra, Rayhan, Last of the Abzan, Sakura Tribe Elder, Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, Steelbane Hydra, Vastwood Hydra, Voracious Hydra, and Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger. I almost see a theme in here, Hydra, Hydra, Hydra.
Hydras are utility, basically.
Yep.
Anything you like or don't like here among the creatures, Chris?
I'm going to go. I have a big list on this.
Okay.
First of all, I don't like Sakura Tribe Elder. I think it's just not quite good enough in this deck. You're not recurring it. At the 2 mana, like we were discussing, I'd rather have like the ramp spells in your instance or something else.
Sure.
Hydra Broodmaster was another one. It's a lot of CMC for a monstrosity ability. You're not getting like an X cost out of it, really. Whereas, yes, if you had the enchantment, you double the X, and I mean, that could go crazy big, but that's just like what ifs there. I'd rather have something more guaranteed. So,
yeah, and, I mean, there are situations with the Broodmaster where, like, if you had a bunch of ways to make infinite mana, then you make it infinitely monstrous, and then it makes infinite Hydras.
Yes.
But there's only one way in this deck to make infinite mana. And then even then, like, they don't have haste. So it would be cool to do, but I think maybe that's an achievement unlock thing. You do it that one time and just say you did it. Because I don't know. I think unless you're in a perfect situation, it's not going to probably be that effective.
Yes.
Because you have to hope nobody can respond over the course of one trip around the table before you can win. It's interesting and it's cool, but I think there's definitely things that are more consistent. I totally agree.
Yep. And now Herald of Secret Streams is a phenomenal card. I love this card.
Yeah.
It works wonderful in this deck. But honestly, if I were to do it, I might pull this card for something different just to stay on theme with the Hydras and focus more on Trample over the unblockable part. So I had a couple of ads that I thought about putting in here. One that I was surprised I didn't see in here is Genesis Hydra. Probably the best Hydra in my opinion. You get to look at the top X cards, you get an XX creature, you get to put something into play. I mean, it fits everything that you want to do when you're casting an X spell costing card.
I would guess the only concern with that is if you hit one of the Hydras with like X in the cost with it, it's probably going to come into play as a 0/0 or something.
But you can hit a land. Yeah, you can hit a land though too. So if it's like you go up and you're like go down 6 cards and you're like they're all X. Well, I'm just gonna play this land then, and then put the rest of them back.
Yeah, I think the downside isn't that much of a downside necessarily. You can very much deal with having that there.
Yep. Mistcutter Hydra is another one. It is an X and a green for you create an XX, so it pretty much fits any point of the curve. So you can either cast it early, you can cast it late. You don't have to put quite as much mana into it to get your commander trigger. Another one is both Pelucernoses. They are such good cards. I'd put them both in. And then the last Hydra that I was going to suggest is Whip Tongue. The ability to just wipe the board of all those pesky flyers. I've seen that thing do work.
If Max gets out of hand with his Dromoka deck, you can just take him down.
And then a final one is, it's not even a Hydra, but in place of the Sakura Tribe Elder, I was thinking about like Dryad of Hisian Grove, the 3 mana 2/3 that lets you, I do believe, play an additional land, but it also turns all your lands to every basic land type. So it's another chromatic lantern. So you get, mana fixing right there.
Yeah, helps with your fixing. It's another body. Yeah, I like that one as well. You had most of the Hydras I had down, though. The only one I had that I think you didn't mention was Hydra Omnivore.
Yep.
Which is 6 mana for an 8/8, and whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent. Doesn't get counters on it as a downside, but yeah, it's a Hydra. It's something that it's on theme, and it's a fun card too, and really changes combat math. That's one that I always kind of like.
Yep.
But the Pelucranos picks are ones that I would really like to see in this deck, especially of the ones you mentioned.
Yeah, I look through the deck list and I'm like, no Pelucranos? What's going on here? I mean, it fits perfect curve because, like, I think the black-green one's 4 mana for a 5/5. The green one is 4 mana for a 4/4. So, I mean, that perfect curve into creatures that have utility on top of them. So, so good.
So one of the questions we get asked here is if we thought that he went too far into X-Spell territory or if he should focus more on the Hydras. What are your thoughts on that, Chris, having looked at the deck now?
I don't think he went too far either way. Honestly, you can do both because, 75% of your Hydras are X casting cost Hydras. So, I mean, that just fills the void right there to begin with.
I pretty much have thought the same thing. It's doing double duty. There's really not much downside to running the Hydras at X in the cost. And the cards, for the most part, that are being ran here as the X spells are really good anyway. Like, Villainous Wealth is a great card just in general. general.
Yeah, that'll just win you a game.
Yeah, Open into Wonder is going to be a good card in general in most situations. So is something like Exsanguinate, or, I can't even remember off the top of my head. There's a handful of other ones in here.
Yep.
Torment of Hailfire. Those are going to be good no matter the situation. You're getting a bonus off your commander here. But no, I agree. I don't think he went too far at all into the split themes.
Nope. The big thing I would do is just focus on getting your land base set up. You're going to need more land for this, especially because it's a big mana hungry deck.
Yep.
So
it's requiring a lot of green, and it's going to be voracious in terms of how much land it's going to use for sure.
Yep. And now we don't suggest this very often, but judging by what we were told about his meta and how he likes to play, why not put some tutors in here? Go for your certain spells that are going to get you way, way ahead type of deal. Try to catch people off guard, like go for the Ozolith or something, tutor it up. Because apparently, you play combo decks and other things, so that shouldn't really be feel bad for you.
Sure.
And, I mean, that's what I would do anyways.
Sure. Yeah. And there's also, I think, the difference between running a tutor or two in your deck and running 8 tutors. When running 8 tutors, you're going to get probably a very similar play experience every time because you're always going to see a tutor and there's always going to be an obvious target. If you're playing 1 or 2 tutors, you're going to see there's going to be, times you go 5 games in a row and don't see that tutor. And in addition to that, when you do see it, maybe you'll be at a point in the game where the Ozolith isn't useful or the Great Henge isn't useful, and you're just going to go get something else. There's situations where maybe Doubling Season or Unbound Flourishing is better, or maybe you want the Shadow Spear to poke through for damage. I feel like this is the kind of deck where there isn't always one obvious tutor target anyway.
Yeah, well, I know exactly what I would tutor right away, but that's me personally. I'd go for that enchantment, Freed from the Real, and just go, mana,
commander. Yeah. But even then, so you go grab that and you have infinite mana, you are not just going to win the game with that necessarily. There's a couple things in here that would, but not all the time.
Yeah.
So I would not feel bad about running a tutor or 2 in this kind of deck for, not at all.
There's even a wonderful tutor that has X in its casting cost, so that would fit the deck too.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is probably going to wrap it up for us. This is a cool deck. This was actually one of the commanders I liked the most from this set, and I think this is the first deck. I have not played against it at all, and I think this is also the first deck list I've really looked at from this commander.
Yeah, actually, after seeing this, it's one of those decks where I'm like, this would be fun to build.
Yeah,
and I would build it, my way, completely different.
Sure.
But
well, it also helps that there's a lot of super cool hydras out there. It's a bit like my Sphinx deck in that regard, where most Sphinxes just do something cool. It's a similar thing for hydras, or they almost all have some cool ability. They're just big, huge, green, smashy beaters too.
Yes.
It's just all the dumb, fun stuff you want to do. And yeah, I like it.
I love it.
I'm a fan of the deck, fan of the commander, and it was fun to talk about. Thanks a lot, Chris, for supporting us on the show and for sharing your deck with us. We appreciate it. This show is going to air, I believe, on the 29th of October, which is a Thursday. And I think the next day is the 30th, which will be Friday. And I think that will be the day our preview card show is going to air. So if you're listening to this, tomorrow, tune in again, and we'll have another bonus show where we talk about the Commander Legends preview cards.
Ooh.
Very excited.
Awesome.
All right. If you'd like to find us on the Twitter birds, you can find me at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max. And you can find Chris at Wise Squishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back tomorrow as well as next Monday with a new show. Until then, I am Dana.
And I'm Chris.